All right, Robbie, looking forward to your radar. What do you have?
Senators, so-called whistleblowers, and members of the media tell us that they're very, very, very worried about Facebook spreading misinformation about COVID-19. Here's my question. Is anyone worried about all the misinformation being spread by the New York Times? The paper of record was forced to print a lengthy correction to a massive error that appeared in a Thursday news article about other countries' approaches to vaccinating young people, and whether one shot would be better than two given the risks of heart inflammation in teenagers. Now, in the article, the Times wrongly claimed that nearly 1 million U.S. children, 900,000 to be precise, had been hospitalized with COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. That figure is way, way off. The actual number is about 63,000 since August 2020, when stats first became available. Now, about 500 Americans under the age of 18 have died of coronavirus. This sad reality shows that the coronavirus can and does kill some immunocompromised young people with serious underlying health problems, comorbidities, or in exceptionally rare cases, healthy kids. But it's wildly inaccurate to say that nearly 1 million kids have been hospitalized with COVID. People who saw that figure in this erroneous New York Times story were duped by misinformation. They're fearing for their kids for very little reason. And while that was the biggest error, it wasn't even the only mistake in this story. According to the correction, the Times reporter, quote, described incorrectly the actions taken by regulators in Sweden and Denmark and misstated the timing of a crucial FDA meeting. You might be wondering whether this was the reporter's first day on the job. Must have been a newbie, right? Well, actually, the author of this wildly flawed piece was the Times' lead coronavirus correspondent, Apurva Mandavili. Look, there's her byline right under the correction. The byline notes she was the winner of the Victor Cohn Prize for Excellence in Medical Science Reporting in 2019. Maybe nobody else was nominated that year? I digress. Now, this is hardly Mandavili's first highly questionable article. In early August, 538's Nate Silver, someone who actually understands statistics and has often criticized excessively negative mainstream coverage of the pandemic, accused Mandavili of framing the Provincetown study of Delta spread in a, quote, misleading and sensationalist way. Tweeted Silver, there has been an awful lot of stealth editing and backtracking from the way you and the New York Times initially framed the Provincetown findings, which both experts and lay people found misleading and hyperbolic, and I agree with him. Mandavili has also tweeted as recently as May of 2021 that anyone promoting the lab leak theory of COVID's origins is, you guessed it, a racist. Someday we will stop talking about the lab leak theory and maybe even admit its racist roots, but alas, that day is not yet here. Mandavili eventually deleted that tweet, but doubled down on the sentiment, saying, well, a theory can have racist roots and still gather reasonable supporters along the way. Doesn't make the roots any less racist or the theory any more convincing, though. Well, it's that simple, I guess. According to the mainstream media, if you suspect the lab leak theory might be right, and cards on the table, I do, you're a racist. As an aside, this has never made any sense. The wet market origin theory was the one better supporting a kind of racist narrative about Asian people, since it impugns very specific Chinese cultural practices. A lab leak, on the other hand, impugns the Chinese government rather than the Chinese people or their culture. So anyone who says the lab leak theory is a racist theory has it exactly backwards. So Mandavili wants you to be very scared of COVID, thinks you're a racist if you disagree with her, and was way, way off with respect to under 18 coronavirus hospitalizations. And she was the person chosen by the editors of the mainstream media's most prestigious news outlet to educate the public about the pandemic. By the way, the Times previously had an excellent COVID reporter, Don McNeil, who had been with the paper since 1976. But he was a bit gruff and irritable, and in 2019, he was accused of making sexist and racist remarks during a trip to Peru where he was supervising some very privileged high school students. He says he was asked whether it was right to suspend a 12-year-old who uttered a racial slur, and giving his opinion on this matter, he repeated the slur. So that was it for him. Cancel culture did its thing. He was forced out of the Times. Now we're stuck with Mandavili, someone who has repeatedly spread misinformation about the pandemic. If this isn't misinformation, the term has no meaning. Yet you're unlikely to hear about any New York Times whistleblowers complaining about the paper's terrible track record of pandemic fear-mongering. No members of the U.S. Senate are going to call for Mandavili to appear at a congressional hearing and answer questions about the threat posed by the Times actively misleading readers. We all just basically accept that traditional media, newspapers, television news, etc., get things wrong sometimes. Yet when the misinformation is being spread by social media, everybody loses their minds. This is treated like a very threat to our democracy. Quick, call the regulators. Summon Congress back into session. Someone somewhere is wrong on Facebook. It's unending. Just a few days ago, Filipino journalist Maria Ressa, the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize winner, said Facebook was biased against facts. Let's listen.
Look, I worry that you can't have integrity of elections if you don't have integrity of facts. And right now you don't have that. In fact, I would say that the platform is biased against facts. The reality, the data shows us that lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further than really boring facts.
Look, there's no doubt you can read things on Facebook that are false, but you can also read things that are false on the front pages of the New York Times. The difference is that the conversation on social media has fewer guardrails. Now, people like Frances Haugen, the much celebrated Facebook whistleblower, think that's a bad thing. But if Facebook vanished tomorrow, we would still consume a lot of bad pandemic info. There would just be fewer options to discuss and challenge it. And that's what the anti-Facebook crowd in Washington really wants. It's not about stopping Mark Zuckerberg. It's about silencing the rest of us. So, Kim, this is, I've been sounding this kind of note a lot. I think some of the criticism of social media, not all of it, but some of it is reminiscent of moral panic. And it just, like, a lot of the things they accuse social media of getting wrong or of being bad on are also, like, massive problems in just the media we've already had. Some of them are worse. And I don't want to go back to that. Am I crazy to think that?
No, I mean, they say that Facebook and these other platforms, they thrive off of sensationalism, but so does the news, right? I mean, to your point, and the news has been wrong a number of times. I mean, we have like Rachel Maddow when she was tweeting out even about the Oklahoma hospital that was overwhelmed because people were overdosing on ivermectin, right? That ended up being false. We have the Russian bounties story saying, that American troops were being, that Russia put bounties on American troops. That was a discredited story. Also, the Brian Sicknick was killed by Trump supporters. That ended up also not being true. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation that is being put out there by the New York Times, by MSNBC, by CNN, by all of these outlets, that are looking for those sensationalized headlines. And so, yeah, it is true that, we've always known this in the media. I mean, before the COVID pandemic, before Trump, it was, sex sells or disaster. If it bleeds, it leads, right? So we know that that this sort of sensational information is, of course, going to trend, whether it be on social media and people are going to be sharing it a lot, or whether it causes these major outlets to get the clicks and the eyeballs that they want. And so if we are going to be critical of social media and say that they're responsible for this, then we have to be critical of all media in general, because all media is actually responsible for no one says break up.
No one says break up MSNBC. No one says break up the New York Times. I just don't. We got to break up Facebook, but all these other.
I think when it comes back to social media and what people are upset about is that the algorithms pick up these stories and then they spread. But again, look, like if you see a headline coming from New York Times or MSNBC that's quite shocking, you're going to share it. And then what's going to happen? Other people in your feed are going to share it. It goes viral on its own simply because of the clickbait headline. So is this a function of Facebook? Is this a function of Twitter? Or is this just a function of human behavior? And I actually think it's more of a function of human behavior than anything.
Yeah.